What happens when a CEO checks into one of his own hotels undercover and discovers a housekeeper crying in a supply closet? Daniel Greer, the founder and CEO of a mid-sized hotel chain with 12 locations across 3 states, felt increasingly uneasy about the direction of his company. Complaints about cleanliness, customer service, and even employee treatment had been trickling up for months. Corporate reports painted a rosy picture, but Daniel knew numbers could be manipulated. To him, something wasn't adding up. Frustrated and determined to see the truth for himself, Daniel decided to go undercover as a guest in one of his hotels. He picked a location he'd never visited personally, a bustling, budget-friendly property in a major city. Most of the employees wouldn't recognize him. The chain's rapid growth had meant he hadn't met everyone. He also went to great lengths to disguise himself. A scruffy beard, glasses, and a weathered baseball cap. As an added touch, he wore thrift store jeans and an old hoodie, completing the look of an unassuming traveler on a shoestring budget. When he stepped into the lobby, the first thing he noticed was the chaotic energy. The front desk staff looked frazzled, with a line of impatient guests snaking through the small space. One of the employees, a young man with a strained smile, was doing his best to pacify an irate guest whose room key wasn't working. Another employee at the desk, an older woman, was typing furiously on the computer and completely ignoring the line. Daniel approached the desk after a long wait and was greeted with a curt, "Name?" Yeah, Dan Roberts," he said, using the pseudonym he'd prepared. The older woman barely looked up at him as she handed over his room key. "Check-out's at 11. "No exceptions." He raised an eyebrow at her tone but said nothing, taking the key and heading to the elevator. The hallways were clean but dimly lit, with a faint smell of cleaning chemicals lingering in the air. When he entered his room, he noticed a few things right away. The bed was neatly made, but there were crumbs on the carpet and a faint stain on the bathroom mirror. It wasn't disastrous, but it wasn't the standard he'd built his company on either. Deciding to explore further, Daniel wandered the halls. As he passed the housekeeping supply room, he heard muffled sobs. He hesitated, unsure if he should intervene, but his gut told him to check. He knocked gently on the door and cracked it open. Inside, a young housekeeper was sitting on an overturned cleaning bucket, her face buried in her hands. Her uniform was slightly too big, and her hair was hastily tied back. She looked up, startled, when she saw him. "Sorry, I didn't mean to," Daniel began, but she quickly wiped her tears and stood up, forcing a smile. "I'm fine, just needed a minute." Her voice wavered. "Are you sure? You seem upset," he said softly, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. She hesitated, then sighed. "It's nothing, just—" "The manager has been on my case all day. I'm doing my best, but it's never enough. And I'm covering 2 floors by myself because someone called out sick. I can't keep up." Her words tumbled out in a rush, and she quickly added, "Please don't say anything. I'll get in trouble if they know I was in here." Daniel's jaw tightened. He could hear the exhaustion in her voice, and it hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't the culture he'd envisioned for his company. He nodded, keeping his tone neutral. "I won't say anything." "But do you need help with anything?" She looked at him skeptically. "You're a guest. Why would you help me?" He shrugged, playing along. "I've got some time to kill. And I used to clean rooms when I was younger. Show me what you need done." After a moment of hesitation, she relented. Together, they tackled a room she hadn't gotten to yet. As they worked, she opened up more about the job. The pay was low, the hours were long, and the manager, Mr. Collins, had a reputation for being harsh and dismissive. "He's not always like that, but when he's in a bad mood, everyone suffers," she admitted. Daniel listened carefully, his hands busy smoothing out the bedspread. He could feel a knot of anger forming in his chest. How had things gotten this bad without him knowing? By the time they finished, the housekeeper, her name was Maria, thanked him quietly and hurried off to her next task. Daniel stood in the empty room, his mind racing. He had a lot more to uncover, and he wasn't sure he was ready for what he might find next. Daniel decided his next move was to observe the management team more closely. He left the room Maria had just cleaned and made his way toward the lobby, noting the employees' hurried movements and the strained atmosphere. It felt like everyone was rushing to put out fires rather than running a well-oiled operation. As he approached the front desk, he noticed the older woman from earlier snapping at a younger employee. "I don't care if you're tired, Alex, just deal with it. You're not the only one short-staffed today." Her voice carried sharply across the lobby. Daniel leaned casually against a pillar, pretending to scroll through his phone while listening in. Alex, the young man who had been working the desk earlier, looked like he was barely holding it together. His hands trembled slightly as he fumbled with a stack of room keys. "Sorry, Mrs. Carver," Alex mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sorry doesn't fix anything," she snapped, turning on her heel and storming off toward the back office. Daniel decided to strike up a conversation with Alex. He approached the desk, keeping his tone light. "Rough day, huh?" Alex glanced up, startled, then forced a tired smile. "You could say that." "Anything I can help you with?" "Actually, I had a quick question. Are you guys hiring right now? I've been looking for work and this place seems..." "Busy," Daniel said, throwing in a small laugh to keep it casual. Alex hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, we're always hiring, but I don't know if I'd recommend it. It's kind of a mess right now." Daniel tilted his head. "What do you mean?" Alex glanced over his shoulder as if checking to make sure no one was listening. Then he leaned in slightly and said in a low voice, "Honestly, management's all over the place. We're understaffed, overworked, and Mrs. Carver's been in a bad mood for weeks. She's the assistant manager, but she acts like she owns the place. The general manager, Mr. Collins, barely even comes out of his office unless there's a major problem." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds rough. How do you keep up?" Alex shrugged. "You just survive. Most people don't stick around long. I'm only here because I need the paycheck." Their conversation was cut short when Mrs. Carver reappeared, her sharp eyes scanning the lobby. Daniel quickly stepped away from the desk, pretending to check his phone again. He didn't want to draw suspicion just yet. Deciding to dig deeper, Daniel made his way to the small cafe attached to the lobby. It was mid-afternoon, and only one employee was working behind the counter, a young woman who looked like she hadn't taken a break in hours. The line was short, but she moved with the kind of speed that came from sheer necessity rather than efficiency. As Daniel waited for his turn, he noticed her wince slightly as she reached for a cup. When he got to the counter, he smiled and kept his tone friendly. "Hi there, busy day." She gave a half-laugh, half-sigh. "You have no idea, what can I get you?" "Just a coffee black," he said, then added, "Are you okay? Looked like your wrist was hurting." She hesitated, then shrugged. "It's nothing, just a little sore from all the lifting. I'll be fine." Daniel frowned. "Do you get any breaks? You've been running around nonstop since I got here." She glanced around nervously, then leaned in slightly. "We're supposed to get breaks, but there's no one else to cover me, so, yeah, it is what it is." As she handed him his coffee, Daniel noticed her name tag, Jenna. He nodded, making a mental note to remember her name. "Thanks, Jenna. Hang in there." She gave him a tired smile before turning to the next customer. Daniel found a quiet corner of the lobby to sit and observe. It was clear that the employees were overworked and underappreciated, and the management team seemed more focused on barking orders than solving problems. He decided it was time to see the man in charge. He made his way to the back office and knocked on the door marked Manager. A gruff voice called out, "Come in." When Daniel entered, he found Mr. Collins sitting at his desk, scrolling through his phone. The man barely looked up. "What do you need?" Daniel kept his tone casual. "Hey, I'm a guest here, but I was wondering if I could talk to you about something I noticed around the hotel." Collins finally looked up, his expression annoyed. "If you have a complaint, take it to the front desk. I'm busy." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Busy with what?" Collins' face darkened. "Excuse me," Daniel shrugged. "I've just been walking around and it seems like your staff is stretched pretty thin. I figured you'd want to know." Collins leaned back in his chair, his expression turning defensive. "Look, we're short-staffed, okay? It's not ideal, but everyone's doing their job. If you're unhappy with your stay, I can offer you a discount." Daniel stared at him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Right, thanks for your time." As he left the office, he felt his frustration mounting. Collins clearly didn't care about what was happening on the ground. It was time to take things further. Daniel spent the rest of the evening talking to more employees, each interaction strengthening his resolve. He learned about Maria's struggles to support her family, Jenna's untreated wrist pain, and Alex's growing anxiety about making ends meet. By the time he returned to his room, he had a clear picture of what was wrong and he knew exactly what he needed to do next. The next morning, Daniel left his room early, determined to dig even deeper. He had decided the night before that he couldn't just observe anymore. He needed to experience what his employees were going through firsthand. He made his way to the housekeeping area where Maria was already prepping her cart for the day. "Hey, Maria," he called out casually. She turned, surprised to see him again. "Oh, good morning." "Can I help you with something?" Daniel gave her a sheepish smile. "This is going to sound weird, but I was wondering if I could shadow you today." "You know, see what it's like to work here," her brow furrowed in confusion. "Why would you want to do that? You're a guest." I know," he said quickly. "But I've been thinking about applying for a job here, and I figured the best way to know if it's a good fit is to see what it's really like. Plus, I don't mind getting my hands dirty." Maria hesitated, clearly unsure, but then sighed. "Okay, I guess. Just don't let management see you doing this." "They'll freak out." Daniel nodded, grabbing a pair of gloves from a nearby shelf. "Deal." Maria handed him a rag and a bottle of cleaner, then led him to the first room on her list. As they worked, Daniel struggled to keep up. Making beds was harder than it looked, and scrubbing the bathroom left his arms aching. Maria noticed his fumbling and couldn't help but laugh. "You're not exactly a natural," she teased. "Yeah, well, I guess I've got some learning to do," he admitted, grinning despite the sweat forming on his brow. As the morning went on, Maria opened up more. She talked about her 2 kids, how she worked double shifts to make ends meet, and how she often skipped lunch to finish her rooms on time. Daniel listened closely, his heart sinking with every word. When they reached the last room on her list, Maria glanced at the clock. "We're behind schedule. If I don't finish soon, mister." "Collins will lose it." "I can finish this one," Daniel offered quickly. "You go start on the next floor." Maria hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I don't want you to get in trouble." "I'll be fine," he assured her. "Go." Reluctantly, she left and Daniel got to work. But as he was tucking in the last corner of the bedspread, the door swung open. It was Mrs. Carver. "What on earth are you doing?" she demanded, her eyes narrowing. Daniel froze, caught off guard. Just helping out." "You're a guest, not an employee," she snapped. "And Maria knows better than to let guests do her work. Where is she?" "She's on another floor," Daniel said quickly. "I volunteered to help. Maria didn't ask me to." Mrs. Carver's lips tightened. "This is completely unacceptable." "I'll be speaking with her about this." Daniel clenched his jaw, doing his best to stay calm. "She's working harder than anyone else here." "Maybe instead of blaming her, you should ask why she's so overwhelmed." Mrs. Carver's face darkened. "I don't need a lecture from you." "Stay out of it." She stormed out before he could say another word. Frustrated, Daniel finished up and went to find Maria. He caught up with her in the hallway where she was cleaning a mirror. "Maria, I'm sorry," he began. "Mrs. Carver saw me and I think she's going to come down on you." Maria's face fell. "Great, just what I need." "It's not your fault," he said firmly. "I'll make sure she knows that." Maria gave him a weak smile but didn't say anything. They continued working in silence until their shift ended. That evening, Daniel sat in the lobby, thinking about everything he'd seen and heard. He knew the time had come to address the issues head-on. He pulled out his phone and called his corporate HR director. "Hey, it's Daniel," he said. "I need you to come down to the city center property tomorrow morning. We've got some serious problems to deal with." The next morning, Daniel arrived early, this time in his professional attire. He didn't bother with his disguise anymore. He called a staff meeting in the conference room, where every employee looked confused and a little uneasy at the sight of him. Maria, Jenna, Alex, and the rest of the team exchanged nervous glances as Daniel stood at the front of the room. "Good morning, everyone," he began. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Daniel Greer. I'm the CEO of this company." The room fell silent. Maria's eyes widened in shock while Mrs. Carver and Mr. Collins looked like they'd just swallowed lemons. Daniel took a deep breath. "Over the past 2 days, I've been here undercover as a guest to see what's really going on. And let me tell you, it's been an eye-opening experience." He turned to Mrs. Carver and Mr. Collins. "Your leadership or lack thereof has created an environment where employees are overworked, undervalued, and afraid to speak up. That ends today, Mrs." Carver opened her mouth to protest, but Daniel cut her off. "I've already spoken with HR, Mrs. Carver. You're being put on a 2-week unpaid suspension. And Mr. Collins, you're being replaced as general manager effective immediately. You can collect your things and leave by the end of the day." The room was dead silent as the two managers stood, their faces pale, and left the room without a word. Daniel turned back to the rest of the staff. "To everyone else, I owe you an apology. You deserve better than what you've been given. Effective immediately, we're hiring more staff to lighten your workload, increasing hourly pay, and implementing mandatory breaks. And for those of you who have gone above and beyond like Maria, Jenna, and Alex, you'll be receiving bonuses and additional vacation time." Maria's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of gratitude. Jenna and Alex exchanged stunned but relieved smiles. Daniel's voice softened. "I'm committed to making this a place where you're proud to work. And I promise I'll be checking in more often to make sure that happens." The staff broke into applause, and for the first time in months, the tension in the room seemed to lift. Daniel knew there was more work to be done, but he also knew he'd taken the first step toward rebuilding trust and his company's future. As the applause died down, Daniel scanned the room, taking in the mix of hopeful and stunned faces. He knew this was only the beginning. Words were easy, earning back trust would take action. "Starting today, I'll be spending more time on site," he announced. "You'll see me regularly, and if you have concerns, my door will be open. This isn't just about fixing problems, it's about making this a place where you feel proud to work." He paused, looking directly at Maria, Jenna, and Alex. "And for those of you who have been carrying the weight of this place on your shoulders, I see you. I won't let that go unnoticed again." The employees began to file out, whispering among themselves. Maria lingered at the back of the room, looking unsure. Daniel approached her. "Maria, can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked. She nodded hesitantly and followed him into the now empty conference room. "I meant what I said in there," Daniel started. "You've been doing an incredible job under impossible circumstances. I've spoken to HR and we're making some immediate changes. First, your hourly rate is going up. Second, I want to offer you a promotion to lead housekeeper. You'll have a say in scheduling and workloads, and you'll get the support you need to make this department run smoothly." Maria's eyes widened. A promotion, I don't know if I'm qualified for that. You are, Daniel said firmly. You've shown more leadership in 2 days than I've seen from some managers, and if you need training, we'll provide it. But this place needs people like you in positions of influence. Her lip trembled as she blinked back tears. Thank you. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, he said with a small smile, and take the rest of the day off. Go home, spend time with your kids. You've earned it, Maria nodded, a mix of gratitude and disbelief on her face. I will, thank you, Mr. Greer. Call me Daniel, he said. As Maria left, Daniel felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He couldn't change the past, but he could make sure his employees felt valued moving forward. The rest of the day was spent meeting with HR and the interim general manager he'd brought in from another location. Together, they reviewed hiring plans, pay structures, and new training protocols. Daniel insisted they prioritize hiring enough staff to ensure no one was stretched too thin again. By the end of the week, the changes were already taking shape. More housekeeping staff were hired, and Jenna finally had a coworker to share cafe duties with. When Daniel visited her during her shift, she greeted him with a smile that wasn't forced for the first time. Thanks for getting me some help, she said as she handed him a coffee. It's made a huge difference. You deserve it, Daniel replied, and about your wrist, I've arranged for the company to cover any medical expenses you need. Just let HR know. Jenna stared at him, stunned. I don't even know how to thank you. By taking care of yourself, Daniel said simply. In the weeks that followed, Daniel kept his promise to check in regularly. He showed up unannounced, not as a CEO looking to catch people off guard, but as a leader who wanted to stay connected. He made a point to sit down with employees during their breaks, listening to their concerns and ideas. Alex, who had been on the verge of quitting, began to thrive under the new management. With clearer expectations, more support, and a manageable workload, his confidence grew. On one visit, Daniel found him training a new front desk hire with enthusiasm that had been missing before. Looks like you're a natural at this, Daniel said, clapping him on the shoulder. Alex grinned. It's easier when you're not constantly drowning. As for Mrs. Carver, her suspension gave her time to reflect on her behavior. When she returned, Daniel sat her down for a candid conversation. I'm giving you another chance, he told her. But things have to change. Your job is to support the staff, not to tear them down. If I see any signs that's not happening, we'll have to part ways. Mrs. Carver nodded, her usual sharpness replaced by a subdued humility. I understand, Mr. Greer. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to do better. Daniel left the meeting cautiously optimistic. He believed in second chances, but he wasn't afraid to act if she fell back into old habits. The biggest transformation, however, came from the team itself. With fairer conditions and a leadership team that listened, morale began to improve. Employees who had once felt invisible started to take pride in their work again. 1 month after his undercover visit, Daniel returned to the hotel for a scheduled check-in. He walked through the lobby, now bustling with energy, and greeted the staff by name. He spotted Maria at the front desk, training a new hire for her lead housekeeper role. She caught his eye and gave him a small wave, her confidence shining through. As Daniel walked away, he felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't felt in years. This was what leadership was about, not just growing a business, but building a community where people felt valued. He made a mental note to visit another property soon. This experience had taught him something he wouldn't forget. To lead effectively, he had to stay connected to the people who made his company what it was. Because no matter how successful a business became, it was only as strong as the people who kept it running.